Hey everybody, welcome to the first video lecture of our skeletal system unit. For this video, it's going to be covering chapter 6.3. And I'm using a new system here through UNK, so far I haven't really liked it. Hopefully it works out better for you all. Okay. So we're going to be looking at bone tissue here, and bone as a tissue actually has very few cells. Most of your bone tissue, when you think of your bones, is going to be a combination of collagen and hydroxyapatite. Hydroxyapatite is a mineral. It's got inorganic salts such as calcium phosphate. They're going to be deposited on the collagen and they're going to crystallize. The hydroxyapatite is going to be responsible for giving bone its hardness and its strength. Collagen is going to give it its flexibility. And so you need a bit of both. You need that hardness from the hydroxyapatite and the flexibility from the collagen so that bones are strong, but they aren't brittle and break fairly easily. You have four types of cells that can be found in bone. You have your osteoblasts, which are going to play a role later in this unit. But osteoblasts are responsible for creating the collagen and the calcium salts in areas to grow bone. So think this is going to be areas like the periosteum and the endosteum, which we'll get to later. Eventually, when those osteoblasts are depositing that collagen and those calcium salts, they're going to be depositing it around them, and it's eventually going to trap them in a little cage, if you will. And at that point, they will differentiate into an osteocyte. Now, an osteocyte is the most common bone cell because a lot of those osteoblasts get trapped there, and then they remain as osteocytes. And they're going to be located in a space called a lacuna. Osteocytes are able to communicate with one another and receive nutrients via canaliculi, and they're going to be responsible for maintaining the mineral concentration of the matrix around them, that collagen and those calcium salts. You also have osteogenic cells, which are going to be in very deep layers of the periosteum, as well as the red and yellow marrow that we'll get to later. And those osteogenic cells are going to be responsible for undergoing mitosis, and so that you can replenish those osteoblasts that are being lost because they're getting trapped in those lacuna. Osteoclasts are another important cell. They're going to be found on the surfaces of bone. They actually don't come from the osteogenic cells. Instead, they're going to come from the line of white blood cells. And they're going to be responsible for breaking down bone and resorbing calcium. So in a later video, we'll see the balance that your body strikes between the osteoblast and the osteoclast. Osteoblast building bone, osteoclast resorbing bone. So you can see a picture of where and what those might look like here. Your osteocytes maintaining that mineral concentration, the osteoblast building bone, osteogenic cells undergoing mitosis, and your osteoclast resorbing bone. Okay. You also have what's known as compact and spongy bone. In your bones, compact bone is going to be arranged in an organized manner known as an osteon. Each osteon is going to be kind of a concentric ring, and each ring is going to be made of calcified matrix, and it's called a lamellae. This here, lamellae is plural. In the very middle of that lamella is going to be your central canal, where you're going to have things like blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves running along the length. Those vessels and nerves are going to branch at a right angle into what's known as a perforating canal, and that's going to be responsible for feeding the periosteum and endosteum, because it's weird to think about, but your bone cells and your bone tissue does need oxygen. Osteocytes that are housed in those lacunae, they're going to be connected to other lacunae via canaliculi. And then your spongy bone is going to contain osteocytes in those lacunae, but they're not going to be in those concentric circles. Instead, they're going to have this kind of lattice, this crisscross pattern called trabeculae, which are actually formed along lines of stress. So if you have certain areas where a bone is constantly being pushed or pulled or twisted, these trabeculae are going to form along those lines to increase the strength of that bone. But spongy bone, different than compact bone because it does have those spaces from that crisscross patterns, which is going to help make sure bones are light enough that your muscles can actually move them. And it also produces or provides the space to house red marrow and allow for hematopoiesis, or the production of red blood cells, to occur. So here you can see those concentric lamellae around each osteon. So one of these total would be an osteon, where you're going to have the central canal, your lymph vessels, your blood vessels, nerves running through there, these right angles that they'll branch in these perforating canals to be able to feed the periosteum and the endosteum. Here you can see another picture of what this would look like under a microscope. Bone is actually very cool to look at under a microscope. And then in your spongy bone here, you can see the trabeculae. They do have lamellae here, but we really don't look at them quite as much in spongy bone. But you can see that it provides tons and tons of space for red marrow to be able to house and allow red blood cells to be created. So like I mentioned, it is important for bones to be able to gather nutrients. They still need oxygen. They still need glucose for those cells. And so arteries are going to enter a bone through what's called a nutrient foramen. And blood is going to exit through veins through those same foramen. Nerves will also follow that path, though your nerves will tend to be in very active areas of the bone and don't necessarily branch to the everywhere in the bone. But it makes sense that they would go to active areas of the bone to make sure they are regulating things like bone growth, blood supply, being able to sense pain and things like that. And so you can see how these blood vessels would be running throughout the length of this bone, making sure that they're supplying everything with the nutrients that they need. And so I'll hold this up here. Hopefully you're able to see it on the video here, but this is a mandible. This is your jawbone here. But on your mandible, here is an example of a foramen right there. So this would be a hole where those arteries and those veins, those nerves are going to be able to penetrate into the bone to be able to supply everything with the oxygen and with the glucose and be able to drain waste and things like that out of it. You do have others on the inside here. You have multiple on your mandible here. So it's just an easy bone to be able to point those out. So again, this is my first video using this new software. Hopefully it works. Let me know if it doesn't, if it did not, and I will re-record here. But